Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study in the book of Psalms. We will be studying Psalm 142 this evening, one of the shorter Psalms, a Psalm of David. And as has been stated in our previous studies, the Psalms are divided into 5 major books. The fifth and last book is comprised of Psalms 107 through 150. Almost all music and poetry are rooted in some kind of historical and cultural setting, and Psalms is no exception to this fact. The joys, the sorrows, the struggles, and hopes of all people are expressed in their music and literature. Therefore, understanding where and under what conditions a psalm was born is very important. Psalm 142 has its historical setting in 1 Samuel chapters 22 through 24, where David was being constantly pursued by King Saul, who was determined to kill him. Saul was very jealous of David, and he thought David was subtly trying to take the kingdom from him. David's great success as a warrior was seen as a threat to King Saul. So these 3 chapters should be carefully studied to see the full picture for Psalm 142. Now following are some of the highlights of these chapters and King Saul's attempts to kill David. So 1 Samuel 23, we find David had gained approval from God for a military intervention and had saved the people of the small town of Keilah from the Philistines, who were fighting them and stealing their grain and food supply. So Saul organized an attack on David, thinking it would be easy to catch him inside the city because Keilah was a city with walls, gates, and bars. But God told David to flee and go to the wilderness of Ziph. While fleeing from King Saul, David did not stay long in any one place. He was constantly on the move. Now, verses 25 and 26 of the same chapter 23, we see that from Ziph, David went to the wilderness of Maon, where once again Saul tried to surround David and kill him. This time, God caused Saul to leave very quickly to go fight the Philistines in another part of the country. So David was free again to go somewhere. So in chapter 24, we find that David fled to the wilderness of En-Gedi, which is located on the west side of the Dead Sea. And he hid in a cave where David had an opportunity to kill King Saul, but did not do so because he considered Saul to be God's anointed one. King Saul had entered the cave without knowing that David was in there, and David carefully and quietly cut off a piece of Saul's garment, but he soon repented of having done so. Now we will go to Psalm 142 and begin reading there, reading verses 1 and 2. I cry out to the Lord with my voice. With my voice to the Lord I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. It is important to observe that David went directly to God with his concerns and supplications. Notice his words. I cry out. I pour out. I declare. These are found in the first two verses. The word complaint in verse 2 could be easily misunderstood. The word complaint just means an utterance or a statement, and it is not an expression of discontentment with God. I ask you now, who do you go to with your supplications? The world offers numerous options, but they rarely are of any great help. Be sure that you go to the Lord first of all. Now we read verses 3 and 4. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. In the way in which I walk, they have secretly set a snare for me. Look on my right hand and see, for there is no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares for my soul. David felt completely overwhelmed with his situation. His enemies had set a trap for him. He saw no way out. The cave he was in was dark, possibly had some scorpions, perhaps even a snake or two. These were his companions. Outside the cave, King Saul and his soldiers were looking for him. Verse 3 says a secret trap or snare had been set to catch David. We have no idea what kind of snare this might have been. His only hope was to call on the Lord. David said, referring to the Lord, "You knew my path." This is still true today. God knows your path and your struggles, and he will hear your voice, your cry as well. David's feelings of abandonment are expressed in verse 4. No one stood up for him. No secure place of refuge was found, and no one really cared about what was happening to him. Have you ever felt that way? Many suicides are taking place today because someone has felt abandoned and felt there was no way out. Now, verse 5. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Once again, David's confidence in the Lord is clearly seen in his words, my refuge and my portion. In the Lord, David found sufficiency, and he found security. The important lesson here for you and me is that David did not permit his nearly impossible circumstances to undo his confidence in God. David kept his eyes on God and not on the circumstances surrounding him. What a wonderful example and challenge for each of us today. Now, I ask you, what effect do your circumstances, good or bad, have on your confidence in God? The Apostle Paul expressed very well in Romans 8:35 through 39 what should be our attitude as we face difficult situations. Paul made a list of a lot of things we might face, such as tribulation, persecution, peril, sword, principalities, powers, or even angels. But his conclusion is found in verse 37, where we read, "Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." So, even when things look hopeless, God is in control. Now verses 6 and 7. "Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me, for you shall deal bountifully with me." David petitioned God to save him. Notice the words, "Heed my cry. Deliver me. Bring me out of prison." These are the kind of words that he used. The prison would have been, no doubt, the cave where David was hiding. David readily recognized his weakness in contrast to the strength and number of those who were persecuting him. His desire and intention was to be able to praise and glorify the Lord for his rescue, and also to experience the goodness of the Lord while being surrounded by friends and not by enemies. So we finish Psalm 142 with so much that is valuable for our lives today. There is no convincing evidence that Psalm 143, also a psalm of David, should immediately follow 142, but there are some hints in the wording of Psalm 143 that lead us to think this way. Notice verse 1 where David says, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my supplications." In verse 3, speaking of his enemies, David said, "He has made me dwell in darkness." In verse 4, David spoke of being overwhelmed. In verse 8, David's prayer to God is, "Cause me to know the way in which I should walk." These phrases are all very similar to what we just examined in Psalm 142. Keep in mind that David was a prolific writer of poetry, and a life-threatening situation such as he was facing could very easily inspire more than just one short psalm, such as 142. So, including Psalm 143 in your study and meditation is certainly worthwhile. May God bless you, and good night.